Welcome to the deep dive. This time, we're taking a bit of a different turn. We're going to be delving into the dark side of Halloween. And I'm not talking about, ghosts and goblins and, spooky stories. We're talking about real crimes that happened on or around Halloween. Cases that are much more terrifying than any horror movie because they remind us that the scariest monsters aren't fictional. They actually walk among us.
Yeah. What we're going to talk about are cases that have baffled investigators and haunted communities for years. Cases that kind of twist the idea of Halloween, turning this night of costumes and fun into something truly sinister.
We'll be looking at poisoned candy, missing children,
Yeah.
brutal murders, and eerie connections to some of the most infamous names in true crime. And each case, trust me, is more unsettling than the last.
To start, we'll go back to 1974, to Pasadena, Texas, the story of Timothy O'Brien. You might know this one as the Candyman case. It's the case that made every parent terrified of Halloween candy.
All right. And then we'll go to Los Angeles, 1957, to investigate the Halloween murders. A twisted tale, a love triangle, a betrayal, and a murder plot disguised as a Halloween prank.
From there, we'll fast forward a bit. 1985, Saxonburg, Pennsylvania, where 8-year-old Cherrie Mahan disappeared just steps from her home, a case that remains unsolved. And really, it raises questions about the safety of our communities, even in those picture-perfect small towns.
Our next stop takes us to Greenwich, Connecticut, 1975. The affluent community. This is the story of Martha Moxley, a teenager brutally murdered on Mischief Night, the eve of Halloween, a case tangled with wealth, privilege, and a chilling connection to the Kennedy family.
And finally, we end up in New York City, 1981, with the trick-or-treat murders, a double homicide with possible ties to, the infamous Son of Sam, a case that suggests even on Halloween, evil can lurk behind the most innocent of masks.
All right, let's start with the case that gave every parent nightmares. The story of Timothy O'Brien and the Candyman. This is the one that really made people question Halloween candy, right?
This case is, well, I guess you could say it's about the most horrifying truth. Sometimes the biggest threat to a child's safety can come from inside their own home.
Exactly. This story revolves around Ronald Clark O'Brien. Seemingly normal guy, family man, a church deacon even.
Mm-hmm.
But behind that, he was drowning in debt, desperately seeking a way out.
And that's where the real horror starts. Ronald saw this, twisted opportunity in the life insurance policies he had taken out on his 2 children.
It's Halloween night, 1974. Ronald takes his son Timothy, 8 years old, and his 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth trick-or-treating. They go with a family friend and his kids. It seems like a normal Halloween, until they get to one particular house. Ronald kind of lags behind. When he rejoins the group, he's got these 5 giant pixie sticks.
But they weren't filled with candy. They were filled with cyanide. Ronald had poisoned them, intending to kill his own children for the insurance money.
I mean, it's just chilling to think about. He actually gave the poison candy to Timothy, Elizabeth, and even the friends' kids.
Later that night, Timothy asks his dad if he can have one of the pixie sticks. I mean, can you imagine that? Handing your own child poison candy.
It gets worse. Timothy takes a bite and tells his dad it tastes bitter. Ronald, instead of, stopping him, he encourages him to wash it down with Kool-Aid.
Within minutes, Timothy's violently ill. He dies on the way to the hospital. The community's in shock. Parents are checking their kids' candy. Total panic.
And all this time, Ronald's playing the grieving father, knowing he's the one responsible.
But the police were onto him pretty quickly. They find out he had recently increased Timothy's life insurance. They discover his inquiries about cyanide. They even find out that the staples on the pixie sticks were a deliberate attempt to delay the other children from eating the poison candy.
It's almost too much to comprehend. He was willing to, sacrifice multiple children, his own daughter even, for money. The other kids only survived because they couldn't open the pixie sticks right away. The evidence was undeniable. And in 1975, Ronald was found guilty of capital murder, sentenced to death. He became known as the Candyman, forever linked to this horrific act.
This case changed things. It fueled the urban legend of poisoned Halloween candy, made parents wary of trick-or-treating, but it also showed something else, that evil can hide in plain sight, even within our own families.
Now, from the chilling betrayal of the Candyman, we moved to Los Angeles, 1957, and the Halloween murders, a story of love triangles and a murder plot disguised as a Halloween prank.
This case, it's not about random violence. It's about calculated revenge, the lengths someone will go to eliminate a rival. The fact they used Halloween as a cover makes it even more disturbing. They used a lighthearted occasion for something dark and evil.
It starts with Peter Fabiano. He was a successful beautician. and his wife, Betty. They seemed like a normal couple, but their marriage was strained, mostly because of a woman named Joan Rabel, a close friend of Betty's.
Peter didn't like Joan, not one bit. There were rumors of a relationship between Joan and Betty. And even though Betty ended up going back to Peter, the tension was still there.
Joan was resentful towards Peter. She started plotting his demise. She manipulated another woman, Goldine Pizer, who was infatuated with her. She got Goldine to help carry out the murder.
They chose Halloween night. They knew Peter wouldn't be as suspicious then. Caught up in the festivities, picture it. Late Halloween night, the Fabianos think trick-or-treating is over, and the doorbell rings.
Peter answers. He's got a bowl of candy and finds himself face-to-face with a figure in a weird, makeshift Halloween costume. And before he can even react, they pull out a gun and shoot him in the chest, point blank.
The killer vanishes into the night, using Halloween as cover, leaving Peter to die and Betty in shock.
At first, the police think it's a random Halloween shooting. But as they investigate further, they uncover the tension between Peter and Joan. Their focus starts to shift.
The investigation reveals the truth. Goldine, manipulated by Joan, was the one in the costume. She pulled the trigger. Joan, driven by jealousy and hatred, orchestrated the entire plot.
Both women are arrested and charged with murder. Goldine, overwhelmed with guilt, confesses. She tells how Joan manipulated her. The trial becomes a media sensation. It exposes their relationship and the cold planning behind the murder.
They're both convicted. Their case became a dark mark on Halloween. It showed how the holiday could be used as a mask for evil, turning fun into terror.
Now, from a calculated murder plot, we're moving on to a small town where a different kind of Halloween horror took place. The disappearance of Cherrie Mahan.
This one takes us to Saxonburg, Pennsylvania, 1985. Just a few months after Halloween. It's a case that's haunted this town for decades. It reminds us that even in the safest places, darkness can be lurking.
Cherrie Mahan was 8 years old, living in a close community. She had a loving family, went to school, had friends. Everything seemed normal, until one February afternoon. She just vanished.
It was a Friday. Cherrie took the bus home, got off at her usual stop, just a short walk from her house. There were other kids there. And then, nothing. She disappeared.
Her mother, Janice, knew right away that something was wrong. Cherrie was never late, never wandered off. The alarm bells started going off. A frantic search began.
Police, volunteers, neighbors, everyone joined in, desperately searching the area, but there was no trace of her. It's like she vanished.
One of the only leads they had was a witness who said they saw a van near the bus stop when Cherrie disappeared. But it wasn't just any van. This one had a really unique mural on the side, like a mountain scene with a skier.
That van, with the mountain scene, became the focus of the investigation. They launched a nationwide search. They thought maybe the driver saw something, or worse, was involved.
The case got national attention. Cherrie's picture was everywhere. Tips came in, but the van, any real leads, they all disappeared.
Weeks turned into months, and the mystery just got deeper. The hope of finding her safe started to fade, and the sense of dread set in.
The police looked at every possibility. Stranger abduction, family involvement, everything. But they couldn't find any evidence to support any of it.
That van with the mountain scene, it was their best lead, but it was never found. It's like it just vanished, along with Cherrie.
This case was tragic, of course, but it was also a turning point for missing children cases. Cherrie became the first child featured on the Have You Seen Me postcards.
Those postcards with her picture went to millions of homes, a plea for information, a symbol that the community wouldn't give up. But even with that effort, no real leads ever came up.
Over the years, they've revisited the case so many times, but the mystery's still there. Cherrie's mother has never given up hope. She still believes that someday, somehow, they'll find out what happened to her daughter.
The disappearance of Cherrie Mahan is a reminder of how vulnerable children are and the power of a parent's love and hope. It also shows how unanswered questions can impact a family, a community, even a nation.
Now, we move on to a case that captivated the country, not just for its brutality, but for its connection to one of America's most prominent families, the murder of Martha Moxley.
This case takes us to Greenwich, Connecticut, 1975. It's Mischief Night, the night before Halloween. It should have been a night of harmless pranks, youthful fun, but it ended in tragedy that would haunt the community for decades.
Martha Moxley was just 15, popular, well-liked. She lived in this exclusive Bellhaven neighborhood. It seemed like a world of privilege and security, untouchable almost. But on that Mischief Night, that sense of safety was completely shattered.
Martha and her friends, including the Skokel brothers, were hanging out that night, doing typical teenage stuff. No one could have predicted the dark turn that night would take.
Martha never made it home. The next day, her body was found on her family's property. She had been brutally murdered, bludgeoned, stabbed with a golf club.
A golf club that would later be traced back to the Skokel family.
The brutality of the murder was shocking. It just didn't fit with the image of this safe, affluent community. Suspicion immediately fell on the Skokel brothers, Michael and Tommy. They had been with Martha that night. Their stories were inconsistent, and their behavior raised some serious red flags.
But the Skokels, they weren't just any family. They were wealthy, influential, and, well, this is the big part, connected to the Kennedy dynasty. Ethel Skokel Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's widow. This connection added a whole other level of complexity to the investigation.
The police were in a tough spot. They needed to solve this murder, but they also had to deal with the potential political fallout of accusing members of such a powerful family.
And to make matters worse, the initial investigation was full of mistakes, delays, evidence wasn't handled correctly, leads weren't followed through, the case went cold, leaving Martha's family and the entire community with this feeling of injustice and unanswered questions.
For years, the rumors swirled. Suspicion lingered. Many believed that one or both of the Skokel brothers was involved, but they just didn't have the evidence.
Then, in the late 1990s, things changed. There was a renewed interest in the case. Investigative journalists got involved, and Martha's mother, Dorothy, was relentless. It all led to a grand jury investigation. That was the turning point.
Witnesses started coming forward, some of them for the first time. They gave compelling testimony about Michael Skokel's behavior on the night of the murder. And they talked about incriminating statements he had made over the years.
By this time, Michael had a history of trouble, struggles with addiction. The grand jury heard all of this and decided to indict him for Martha's murder, almost 25 years after it happened.
The trial was a media circus. It happened in 2002. The prosecution built a case based on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence. They argued that Michael, in a jealous rage, had attacked Martha with a golf club from his own home.
The defense, of course, maintained his innocence. They claimed he was being targeted because of his family's wealth and connections.
The jury deliberated for weeks. It was intense. And then they reached a verdict. Guilty. Michael Skokel was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. It seemed like justice, finally.
But as you know, the story doesn't end there. Michael kept appealing his conviction, always saying he was innocent. After 11 years in prison, a judge granted him a new trial. The judge said there were errors in his original defense, and the case blew up in the media again.
It didn't stop there. In 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court actually vacated Michael's conviction. So after all this, the case is officially unsolved.
Michael Skokel is a free man, and the murder of Martha Moxley is a mystery. A case that shows how justice, wealth, influence, and the search for truth can all be intertwined.
Now let's move to our final Halloween horror, the trick-or-treat murders of 1981 in New York City. This case stands out not just because of how brutal it was, but because of the possible connection to one of New York's most notorious serial killers, the Son of Sam.
This case takes us to the heart of Manhattan on Halloween night, a night full of costumes, parties, and, well, a chilling sense of danger. We're going to explore the story of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman, a couple who were killed in their own home.
Ronald was a photographer, and Elizabeth was his girlfriend. They lived in a fancy townhouse in Chelsea, living the dream, it seemed.
But on Halloween night, 1981, their world was shattered. Someone knocked on their door, and what happened next was a brutal attack that left both of them dead. This case, it's raw, it's gritty, and it takes us deep into the underbelly of the city. It also raises questions about a possible connection to one of the most infamous figures in criminal history, the Son of Sam. So we've talked about cases from small towns, wealthy suburbs, and now we're back in the heart of New York City. But this time, it's not just about a murder. This case has a potential connection to one of the most notorious criminals in American history, David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam.
It's 1981, Halloween night. A night for costumes, parties, trick-or-treating. But in a quiet townhouse in Chelsea, a very different scene was unfolding. A scene of violence and terror.
Our focus is on Ronald Sisman, a successful photographer, and his girlfriend, Elizabeth Platzman. They seem to have it all, living in a luxurious townhouse in one of the most vibrant parts of the city.
But on that Halloween night, their world was shattered. Someone came knocking on their door, and what followed was a brutal attack that left both of them dead.
The crime scene was horrific. Ronald had been severely beaten, and both he and Elizabeth had been shot in the head, execution style. And the apartment, it was a mess. Things were overturned, drawers were pulled out. It looked like there had been a struggle and someone had been searching for something.
The police, faced with such a brutal scene, they immediately launched an investigation. And given the state of the apartment, the initial thought was robbery. Maybe a home invasion gone wrong.
And there were rumors that Ronald might have been involved in drug dealing, so the police also considered the possibility of a drug-related hit, maybe a deal gone bad or some kind of revenge.
That seemed to make sense, especially with the apartment being ransacked. Like, maybe the killers were looking for drugs, money, or something valuable that Ronald was thought to have.
But as the investigation went on, that theory started to fall apart. They couldn't find any real evidence to connect Ronald to any drug activity, and they couldn't find anyone who had a motive to hurt him like that.
And the way they were killed, execution style, it just didn't fit with a typical drug-related murder. It pointed to something more planned, more cold-blooded.
Right. It felt like a professional hit, like someone had been hired to kill Ronald and Elizabeth. But if that was the case, then who would want them dead and why? The police started digging into Ronald's life, his business dealings, his relationships, trying to find anything that might explain why someone would target him.
And then, something really strange happened. A piece of information surfaced that sent chills down everyone's spines. A possible connection to David Berkowitz, the son of Sam.
It was a shocking twist. Berkowitz had terrorized New York City just a few years earlier. His seemingly random shootings had left 6 people dead and many more injured. The city was gripped by fear, and when he was finally caught, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But now, his name was resurfacing in connection with this new case.
The police were skeptical at first, but they couldn't ignore it. Just before the Halloween murders, an inmate at the same prison where Berkowitz was being held came forward with a chilling claim.
He said that Berkowitz had confessed to being part of a satanic cult, and that this cult was planning a ritualistic murder on Halloween night.
And get this, the inmate said that Berkowitz had even mentioned that the cult's target was a photographer in Manhattan, which of course matched Ronald Sisman perfectly.
It was almost too much of a coincidence. Could the trick-or-treat murders be the work of a satanic cult, carrying out some kind of twisted Halloween ritual? It was a terrifying thought.
The police questioned Berkowitz, but he was vague, evasive. He admitted to knowing about a cult that was involved in murders, but he wouldn't give any details. He wouldn't confirm or deny his own involvement.
So even with his cryptic statements and the inmate's claim, the police just couldn't find any hard evidence to link Berkowitz or any cult to the murders.
The investigation eventually hit a dead end. They had a lot of theories, but no real answers. It was a frustrating and unsettling outcome.
The trick-or-treat murders are still unsolved. There's no shortage of theories, but the truth is still out there somewhere. And for the families of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman, the pain of not knowing who took their loved ones is something they have to live with every day.
It's a reminder that even on a night dedicated to fun and fantasy, like Halloween, darkness can find a way in, and that evil can sometimes hide in plain sight, even in a city as bright and bustling as New York.
We've explored some pretty dark territory in this Halloween special. Cases that show the potential for evil that exists in the world, the ways trust can be broken, and how justice can be so difficult to find.
These stories, they're not meant to scare us into hiding. They're meant to make us think, to be more aware of the world around us, and to appreciate the good things in our lives.
They're a reminder to be vigilant, to cherish the people we love, and to never stop searching for the truth, even when it's hidden in the shadows.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the dark heart of Halloween. We hope these stories have given you something to think about, and maybe, just maybe, they've reminded you that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope.